Okay, so I'm going to warn you now. I'm not sure what's going on with my editing software, but for some reason it's blacking out the screen and leaving my voice still intact. So there's going to be a lot less editing. So I apologize in advance if my phone goes off, or if you hear the cats meowing or lawnmower in the background or whatever, but I'm doing the best I can. I'm sure you guys already know that because I've said it a bazillion times. But with that in mind, I'm going to try and kind of pre-cut my lectures so that we can kind of keep them as short as possible. So chapter 8, articulations and movement. Naming the joints, classes of joints, types of movement, range of motion, description of selected joints, effects of aging. All right, naming the joints. You can name the joints in two ways. It can either be anatomically or it can be physically. Anatomically, of course, that's not the right color. Anatomically, we're talking about what the structure of the joint is, and it depends on what type of connective tissue is holding the bones together, the presence or absence of a fluid-filled cavity, because we've got kind of simpler joints and then we've got really complex joints. So in this case, we've got three classifications. We've got fibrous, that's held together by fibrous connective tissue, cartilaginous, guess what holds that together? And then we've got synovial. Synovial are going to be the ones that are complicated. Now, for the sake of the lecture, we are going to go into a lot of detail about this, but I still want you to understand the functional classifications. Basically, functional classification is based on the degree of movement. We have three classifications: the synarthrosis, the amphiarthrosis, and the diarthrosis. Synarthrosis are the non-mobile joints. In other words, the sutures in your skull, they don't move around because they're not, well, you don't want your brain to get squished or damaged. Amphiarthrosis are slightly mobile joints. Slightly mobile joints would be like the joint that is between the two bones in your forearm. They do move slightly, but it isn't a lot, and it kind of isn't intentional. It's more about how they are put together and how they're held together. Diarthrosis are freely mobile joints. So your elbow, your wrist, your fingers, your hips, your knees, anything that moves around is considered a diarthrosis. Really? I didn't realize I had that much animation. Okay, so the fibrous joints. It consists of two bones united by fibrous connective tissue. There is no joint cavity. There's no place that has space in it, and it exhibits little to no movement at all. Examples include the sutures, the syndesmosis, and the gomphosis. Sutures you already know because we've worked on the skull in lab. They're seams between bones of the skull that often interdigitate or have interlocking finger-like processes, and they add considerable stability. So if you put your fingers together and they interlock, okay, that's interdigitate. And the fact that you don't have two smooth ends means that if I shift around, I'm not going to be able to actually shift the bones because they're interdigitated, like you see here in this picture that I've drawn. Between the bones is dense, regular, collagenous connective tissue. Remember, the dense regular had all of the fibers going in the same direction. So they actually go across. Let me change colors again. They go across these joints. So you know the periosteum? The periosteum actually extends all the way across, kind of adding to the stability of these joints. They're combined to make what we call the sutural ligament. The margins of the bones within the sutures are sites of continuous intramembranous growth, with many eventually becoming ossified. So as these bones grow, I continue to add bone in these little spaces here so that these actually go separating, or well, they'll start moving, separating from each other, basically splitting so that you are putting bone down and allowing the skull to get bigger. In newborns, we have that membranous area. We talked about this before, the fontanelles. You've got the anterior fontanelle, the posterior, the anterior lateral, the posterior lateral. Don't forget, anterior means in front, posterior means in back, lateral means to the side. So the names actually do make sense. This allows the head to become flexible during the birthing process and allows the head to grow fairly quickly after birth. The syndesmosis, like I said, the bones in your forearm, the radius and the ulna, you've got this interosseous membrane between the two bones. You have a fibrous joint with these distant bones. They're joined by ligaments. Because of that, there is some movement that can occur, but it's primarily because of the flexibility of the ligament, not because it was designed to be completely mobile. This is what allows you to move your hand face up and face down, the fact that these bones kind of pivot around each other. So this would be an example of an amphiarthrosis because it is slightly mobile. Even if somebody holds their arms still and you take your hands and kind of pivot around those two bones, they will move. Not much, but they will move. The gomphosis is actually a specialized joint consisting of pegs. You can see the pegs of your tooth here, fitting into the socket of your skull. Okay? Now, if you look, you can see that you've got these ligaments here. These are the periodontal ligaments. Just like any other joint being held together by ligaments or bones being held together by ligaments, these are ligaments holding your tooth in place. So these bundles of regular collagenous connective tissue hold your tooth in place in both your mandible, your lower jaw, and your maxilla, the upper jaw. There is a slight amount of give during mastication. Mastication meaning chewing. Basically, you've got to remember that when you're chewing, your teeth are kind of hitting together. If they hit together and there was no give in between the teeth, then it would mean that your teeth would kind of rub themselves down, almost wearing themselves down. Having just a slight amount of give, a slight amount of wiggle to your teeth prevents that. Cartilaginous joints. Now, with cartilaginous joints, you have two kinds. You have synchondrosis, which you can't see me writing that at all. Synchondrosis, and you got syndesmosis, or symphysis. Now, the difference between the two is what kind of cartilage is holding the joint together. Synchondrosis. So I always think the first cartilage that pops into my head is hyaline cartilage. So hyaline cartilage is responsible for synchondrosis. Symphysis, you already learned this for your practical. You had the pubic symphysis holding the joints together at the pubic bone. That is actually fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is designed to be more of a shock absorber. It's designed to be bouncy. So synchondrosis, examples of synchondrosis. Most of these are going to be immobile joints. They're not going to be movable. A good example that we just went through is the growth plates, the epiphyseal plates. Technically, this is still going to be hyaline cartilage, and it still exists between two pieces of bone. Now, is it mobile? No. Do we want it to be mobile? No, because if we make it mobile, it'll actually kill those cells that are in that growth plate. Our pelvic bones, our coxal bones, are actually three separate bones. We've got the ilium, we've got the ischium over here, and we've got the pubis bone here. And there's actually kind of a joint, a peace sign joint, I guess, that holds these three bones together. Eventually we become adults. It solidifies just like our growth plates. Another good example are the pieces of cartilage between our ribs and our sternum. These are also holding two bones together, and they're made out of hyaline cartilage. Most of these types of joints, most of our synchondrosis, go through something called synostosis. Okay? Synostosis meaning that they eventually turn into bone, like what we see with the growth plates, like what we see with the coxal bones, the hips. Now, the symphysis joint. The symphysis joint, the pubic symphysis right here, it consists of fibrocartilage joining the two bones together. It is slightly mobile. Again, it's an amphiarthrosis, but it's only slightly mobile because of the way that fibrocartilage is put together. Fibrocartilage is bouncy like a racquetball. So just having fibrocartilage around means that it is slightly mobile. Like a racquetball would be, if I put anything on top of it, it would bounce. So the synovial joints, they contain synovial fluid, which allows considerable movement between articulating bones. These are more anatomically complex than either fibrous or cartilaginous bones. So this is an example of a symphysis joint, okay, or I'm sorry, symphysis, a synovial joint. It has articular cartilage since the bones are moving. Remember what I said. Bone against bone would be like fine grit sandpaper, rubbing on fine grit sandpaper. It wouldn't be a good thing. So we put bones at the end. Remember, articulate means to come together. So it's hyaline cartilage that covers the ends of bones that are articulating. It provides a smooth surface where the bones can meet. An articular disc is a flat plate of fibrocartilage located between articular cartilage. If you look here at this picture down here at the corner, you will see this kind of hamburger patty that's here in between the two bones. That is an articular disc. You can also see this thing here surrounding this? This is the synovial capsule. This articular disc is actually attached to that synovial capsule, so it can't slip or slide. It's actually kind of anchored in place. Now, a meniscus. I'm sure if anybody watches sports, you've heard of a torn meniscus. It's basically an incomplete crescent-shaped fibrocartilage pad at your knees or your wrist with a hole in the center. So if you look here, you can see that this is flat, but the ends are raised here and here, almost like it's making a cup for your femur to sit in so that it doesn't slip off. That is a meniscus. When somebody tears the meniscus, they're actually tearing this piece of cartilage off of their knee, which is a bad thing and it's not a good feeling. Articulating bones are encased in a synovial joint. So, a synovial joint cavity, which is surrounded by something called a joint capsule. So, just give me 1 second. I'm going to scoot this up just a little bit so I have a little bit more drawing room. Okay. Where is there? All right. So our bones, we've got an upper bone, let's say the bottom of the femur, top of the tibia. They're actually being encased in this capsule that actually covers them up, okay, and holds them in place. You can see that up here in this picture. This is what I've just drawn, except I've drawn it completely enclosing it. So the articulating bones are encased in a synovial joint cavity, which is surrounded by a joint capsule. The joint capsule helps to hold the bones together while allowing for movement. It basically is like putting an ace bandage on a sprained ankle. It kind of supports it, but still allows it to move. You have two capsules around this joint. Okay, you've got a fibrous capsule, which you can see here. It's kind of that beigey yellow color. And then you've got an inner capsule here called the synovial membrane. So the fibrous capsule, it's dense, regular connective tissue. And it's continuous with the fibrous layer of the periosteum. Literally, the periosteum down here is the same thing. It just kind of goes over and then anchors back down to the bone with our Sharpie's fibers. Now, the synovial membrane, which is the lighter blue that you see here, okay, is a delicate membrane that lines cavities except over the articular cartilage. If I've got a super delicate membrane, I don't want to put it in the middle of a molcajete, right? So I've got it basically going around, but not where they're actually going to be bones grinding together. So this actually comes around, goes around this capsule and then comes back around, and it's surrounding the bone where that articular cartilage isn't. Let's see. The cells in this synovial capsule actually secrete a synovial fluid. Synovial fluid is serum filtrate, so the watery portion of our blood, and it actually has a chemical in it that makes it slick. So it's very much like having lubricant in between your joints, so that it even helps your cartilage, which is smooth to begin with, flow even smoother. So the synovial membrane, okay, continued. The bursa. There's an extension of the synovial joints that basically protects the softer tissues that are rubbing against it. Whenever we move our fingers or we move our wrist or we move our elbow, our muscles are actually rubbing up against that joint because they're having to kind of go over it. When that happens, we don't want our softer tissues, our muscles, our skin, to basically rub on sandy sandpaper bone. So we've got this covering that basically takes the brunt of all of that rubbing. Sorry, guys, my headphones are starting to slip. And by covering that rubbing, it basically makes sure that they're not being damaged. Bursitis is a disease where you actually have swelling in that membrane. Moving becomes very painful because you've already got something that's irritated and you're irritating it more by rubbing on top of it. The outer margins of the joint actually do have blood vessels and nerves. If you look here, you can see that. Now, why not in the middle? Well, again, I don't want my blood vessels or my nerves being caught in a molcajete. Plus, if there is an issue with the joint, my joint is going to swell. Those blood vessels are around that capsule surrounding the joint, so it's going to tell me, it's going to alert me that there's something wrong. Nerves can enter the fibrous or synovial membrane to indicate pain, position, or degree of movement. Literally, you know when you hyperextend a joint because those nerves that are around it let you know. The types of synovial joints. We have 6 types of synovial or moving joints, and it's all based on their articulating surfaces, how they come together. We have plane joints, saddle joints, hinge joints, pivot joints, ball and socket joints, and ellipsoid joints. The movements can basically be uniaxial, biaxial, or multiaxial. So remember in geometry, we had the x-axis, the y-axis, and then the z-axis was supposed to be coming at your face. So you basically had 3 dimensions when you talked about geometry. Well, in uniaxial means that it only moves on one of these planes. Biaxial means that it moves around 2 of those planes. Multiaxial means that it's along several axes. It happens along a whole bunch of different ones. So plane or gliding joints, you have 2 opposed flat surfaces with a slight amount of gliding motion that can occur between the bones. It's considered uniaxial because some rotation can occur, but it's limited by the ligaments and adjacent bone. You know what? I think I'm going to stop for a second, and as I go through the synovial joints, I'm going to record myself so I can show you how the movements work. Let's see how that works for the recording. Dun, dun, dun. Let me get out of here.